Hey, clitorati and pleasure seekers. Welcome to the Pleasure Positive Podcast, your go-to spot for everything sexy, intimate, and downright pleasurable. Today, we've got a dynamite guest, none other than the fantastic Dr. David J. Ley. He's a clinical psychologist, certified sex therapist supervisor, and all-around rock star of modern sexuality. He's been on TV with the big shots like Anderson Cooper and Dr. Phil, and his wisdom has graced the pages of the New York Times. Impressive, right?
Well,
But wait,
and Hustler magazine,
oh yeah.
Hustler and Playboy. I was getting my haircut one time, and I was reading Playboy magazine as I was getting my haircut, and I like fell out of the chair because I was in there. They were referencing my first book in an advice column about cuckolding, and I was to my barber. I was like, "That's me, that's me."
You're like,
He
I'm
thought it
in.
was funny. He still
That's when
talks
you know
about it.
you've made it, when you made it in Playboy.
That's right. And I sent all of those articles and magazines to my mom. She only reads the articles.
I love it. Yeah, we've both had our parents on the podcast, and that's when we were talking about even raunchier stuff than we do now.
Oh boy.
Yeah, and you mentioned your books, and we're so excited to dive into your wild and intriguing world of your book, Insatiable Wives, Women Who Stray and the Men Who Love Them. And we're going to be talking about hot wife and cuckold lifestyle. And I can't believe that we have never done an episode on this
That's what
in
I was saying.
300 episodes. So truly, let's get ready for a conversation that's not just informative, but downright interesting. Dr. Ley is spilling the beans on the history, stories, and the wild ride of this unique sexual lifestyle. So we're talking empowerment, breaking taboos, and embracing the full spectrum of the human experience. So kick back, relax, and join us as we embark on this empowering journey with the incredible Dr. David J. Ley.
Yeah, we were just talking before this, and I can't believe we've never done an episode about this. I was Googling, and it was pretty hard to find somebody with your, extensive research that would be really educated to talk about this. So I'm so excited to jump right into this. I know that you have multiple amazing books written, and that we will definitely link in our show notes. But let's really kick things off by diving into this fascinating world. Let's talk about your book, Insatiable Wives. Can you kind of give our listeners a brief overview of the book and what
Sure.
inspired you to explore like cuckolding and hot wifing?
Right, right. Um, so I'm a very traditionally trained clinical psychologist. A lot of people don't know that most therapists, most psychologists, and certainly most marriage and family therapists get absolutely no training on sexuality. That is starting to change a little bit. Um, but early in my career, I started working with sex offenders, and it was just because I had a good poker face and I could listen to some really challenging, hard stuff and still stay present with the patient. But over time, with the last name Ley, everybody started referring all the sex cases to me, right? And but I started working more with alternative sexuality folks. And so these were folks in non-monogamous relationships, BDSM, various kinds of kink, etc. And what I was hearing was that these folks had trouble getting therapy from therapists that didn't shame them. That didn't say, oh, well, you must be into kink because you were traumatized, or you must be into non-monogamy because you have attachment issues. And, and I didn't think that was right. And again, I'm a pretty non-judgmental guy. And so started working with those folks. And was collecting some data for a study that I've really never completed or finished, and I ran across these couples that live the hot wife or the cuckold lifestyle. And this is where the wife is non-monogamous and with the enthusiastic permission of the husband, and typically the husband is monogamous.
Oh.
And I will confess, my initial response was, "That's fucking crazy. That can't work." But luckily, the two couples that I met in that research were remarkably healthy. They had been married for decades. They had incredible communication skills, successful marriages, careers. By every measure that a scientist or a clinician would use, these were healthy people. So then I turned the finger back on myself and I was like, David, why did you assume this must be unhealthy? And I realized that without me noticing, a whole lot of bias around female sexuality, around monogamy, around promiscuity, whatever that is, had intruded into my clinical thinking without me noticing. And, Kinsey said it best. The definition of a nymphomaniac or a sex addict in today's language is anybody who has more sex than therapist. So if your patients are getting laid more than you, clearly there's something wrong with them, not you, the therapist. There's so much subjectivity in there. And I realized that in myself. And I said, now I'm a bookworm. I mean, you see all my books there. I'd always wanted to write a book, and I went to the literature, and there was nothing written about this lifestyle that I could find in the clinical literature. So
It's true. I looked.
yeah, my book is kind of it. I mean,
Yeah.
the cuckold community refers to my book as kind of the Bible of cuckolding. And so I said, well, let me understand this. And so I spent about a year and a half interviewing couples. I'd post ads on Craigslist, and they would. This was back in the day before Sesta and Fosta killed Craigslist personals, and they would send me naked pictures of the wife because they thought I was playing a game, and I'd say thank you, she's lovely, but really I just want to interview you. And
Wow.
at the end of the day, I had this book, and it was a remarkable journey, just trying to understand how and why these couples, had made this work in their lives. And at the end of the day, I said, for healthy people, this appears to be a pretty healthy activity. And there's lots of motivations for it. We can talk about that. But I realized that there was, that these couples uh, had kept their lifestyle secret because of the judgment, because of the shame, because of the stigma. I talked in the book about all the history. That was one of the fun things, was diving into the history and finding discussions of cuckolding and this kind of female-led non-monogamy going back thousands of years. And there was nothing new, but it was secret. We didn't talk about it. Now, so I published the book in 2009, and it really has changed my career. I mean, I do a lot of other work now as a result of the foray that book offered me, the entree into the public sphere around sexuality. But the interesting thing is that in the past, 12 years, cuckolding has gone mainstream. And all of a sudden, there's discussion of it everywhere. I mean, you got Fox News calling people cucks, but you've also got Jerry Falwell Jr. getting caught, watching the pool boy. And this stuff is just kind of all of a sudden everywhere. And cuckold porn is hugely popular on the internet. And for some reason, whatever happened, my book just fell at the right time and caught the edge of this wave.
So we've heard, just really understand. I know you briefly went over it. Hot wife and cuckold lifestyle, right? So, in terms of hot wife and cuckold style, they might be new for some of our listeners. Can you break down exactly
Sure.
what these mean? And is there any distinction between the two?
So, one of the things that I will confess I find a little personally annoying about a lot of the sexual kind of alternative communities is that they get obsessive compulsive about using the terms the way they think they need to be used. And so there's all these rules, right? If you oh, you're doing it wrong. And that
Are
makes
you
me
poly?
nuts.
Are you a swinger?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Same thing here. So um cuckolding, now first you have to understand that historically cuckolding is a term that was used to describe non-consensual infidelity, when a wife was unfaithful behind the husband's back, and it was called cuckolding because the cuckoo bird flies around and lays its eggs in the nest of other birds. And then that cuckoo egg hatches before the other bird. And then the cuckoo chick consumes the food of the other birds and starves the other chicks. And so naturalists of the day looked at that and said, that's what happens when a guy's wife cheats on him. The guy might end up investing in the children of another man that are not genetically related to him. So cuckolding was a term describing this non-consensual infidelity. There was a word called whittle. Nobody uses it now. I'm the only one that talks about it. But it was it was a word that described when the husband was okay with the wife being unfaithful. Well, what we have nowadays, cuckolding, is consensual non-monogamy by the wife. Typically, the husband, and so really it's whittlery, but they don't call it that. And because they really embrace and roll around in the idea of the wife cheating on them, even though she's not. She's doing it with his permission.
Right. It's a kink.
Yeah, it's a kink. And cuckolding oftentimes involves the husband in a submissive kind of posture, a kind of a submissive BDSM sort of flavor. Sometimes he's humiliated. Sometimes he's put in a cock cage for chastity, and the wife has the key on her neck.
Are the men always in the room?
Sometimes, oftentimes that's the way it starts. Sometimes though, they send the wife off on a date and they want to hear about it. And what's interesting in those cases is a lot of the guys will talk about kind of quote cuck angst, where they're really filled with all this kind of anxiety. Is she going to come back? Is she still going to love me? Is she still going to want me? And that angst kind of feeds its energy for their for the experience. Sometimes the cuckold humiliation involves forced bisexuality. So there's a more submissive kind of flavor. Now, hot-wifing looks more like swinging, but again, focused on the wife's sexuality. So in hot-wifing, the husband isn't taking a submissive posture, but is just sharing his super hot, insatiable wife with other men. And there, the guy kind of gets a lot of attention and pride over having this wife that other men want. If you remember that song, Save the Last Dance for Me, back in the 60s, right?
Yeah.
The same kind of flavor. Yeah, it's kind of exciting to me to see these other men want my wife. I know she's still mine. And I know she can fuck you into the ground. And that's kind of exciting.
I definitely had a hot wife era.
Oh boy.
And probably.
Oh, so yeah, David, you should know, but both of us have definitely dabbled in the world of non-monogamy.
Yes,
I
so
love
my
it.
husband and I started as a monogamous couple, and then I came out as bisexual because I always had been. I had a girlfriend before him. That opened us up into the world of non-monogamy, where I started dating women. But then this one over here, my best friend Lindsay was like, "Let's go to our sex party." She went to one and she was like, "I think you'd." Yeah, she's like, "I think you'd really like it." And the rest is history. Here we are, like 6 or 7 years later. I've had my fair share. We've hosted parties, and
I didn't just convince her. I convinced her and like 9 of my closest girlfriends to go to the sex party with me.
Traveling orgy. Okay.
Yeah, basically. One of our friends, it was her one and only sex party. Our other co-host, her and her husband actually got pregnant at the sex party.
Conceived their baby there.
Conceived their baby there.
Powerful.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
They were trying though. They wanted to have it.
So they were trying. And so,
yeah.
So that's
and she's the token monogamer. So it was so ironic.
Right. Yeah. So the interesting thing though, and I speculated about this in Insatiable Wives, is that there is some evidence that when men believe their wife may have been unfaithful or could be unfaithful, the man's ejaculate contains more sperm. And so in the cuckolding kind of relationships, that competition turns into this sexual, jet fuel. And a lot of couples identify that as they open their relationship and start being sexual with other people, all of a sudden their sex life just energizes because all of a sudden they're reclaiming and competing. But I have suggested that for couples that are struggling to conceive, one thing that they could explore is the wife having protected sex with another man and then unprotected sex with the husband. It's an experiment that nobody has taken me up on, but I think it's good,
I will.
just good science.
I'll do it.
Yeah, definitely. When you start having a baby, Lindsay, like I feel like going to sex
We're gonna
parties,
start trying this
go to
year.
sex parties when you're ovulating, you know?
I'll be your case.
Honey, I'm ovulating. It's time to go to a sex party.
I'm dead. I wish Katie was here. She's literally our other co-host. I feel like we would be like, you can thank the sex party for getting pregnant.
Not exactly. Yeah, I think it's a reasonable argument.
Yeah,
It sounds logical. I like it. Let's run with
David
it.
Ley says it's true. I believe it.
Now, there is another term now that has just started floating in the past couple of years called stag vixen. And that is, again, it's like hot-wifing, but it's guys that are saying, hey, I'm no cuck. I'm not a weakling. I'm not, I'm a powerful guy in and of myself. And my wife is super hot. And if you want to play with us, great. But there's no humiliation and no submission, no, none of that stuff. And again, as I said, people get into, oh, you got to say it right, you got to use the right terms, and they get real defensive about what the terms mean. And that I understand. I mean, they're defining themselves. But it's interesting to me, and Madison, your story, I think, is one of the things that's really interesting because research on non-monogamy is really new. Just in the past, Deb Anapol started writing about it in the 80s and 90s, but it's really only in the past 5-10 years that much research has started around it. And what I'm really interested in is people's trajectories, the etiologies, because, Madison, you shared how you guys kind of flowed. One of the things with cuckold couples that I see a lot is the couple enters into this because the guy comes to the wife and says, I think this would be really hot. And the wife is like, are you kidding me? And the wife oftentimes thinks that the husband is setting her up, and eventually the husband convinces the wife, no, this is something I really want. Well, then the couple does it. And then the wife is like, well, if we're going to explore your fantasy, I've got a few. And then the wife starts embracing and they move into other areas. So I've seen cuckold couples enter non-monogamy for cuckolding and then turn into swingers or turn into poly or turn into BDSM couples. I've seen couples go swinging and then go into cuckolding because the husband is like, swinging is a lot of work. I'd rather just kind of watch you have sex. So those courses I find really interesting, but because all the research is brand new, we don't have much of that yet.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would say that I initially identified probably more as a swinger in the beginning, and then the last several years have identified as polyamorous. But then because of trauma resurfacing, because of some external situations, but then also just being ready as we open our heart, just more trauma services. My husband and I have been on a poly pause where, so it's like we hold the philosophy, but we're just really, I mean, we've been together for going into our 10 years. So we're like, what it's going to take to be together for the next 10 years. And I'm about to turn 30. My husband met me when I was 20 and he's 15 years older than me. So I'll just say it for what it is. He was my savior. And the reality is now that I'm 30 and I'm all grown up, I don't need him to save me anymore. In fact, it doesn't turn me on like it used to. So right. Our whole, why we fell in love and our desires have totally shifted. And so reestablishing that foundation, it just felt really healthy to pause and just focus on that. But of course, I'm still like, we're still poly, and it's an interesting, I mean, when we talked about how we will enter back in, even inside of polyamory, it's a very specific kind of polyamory. One thing I identified is like, I'm not okay with the relationship escalator, because that freaked me out when I went from swinging to poly and he was allowed to fall in love. Well, he fucking did. And then I was going faster than I could keep up with. And I didn't know that there was such thing as like a relationship escalator. I wasn't aware of that concept. And so when we do enter back into polyamory, it'll be very different than it was for the last few years. And I'm so interested, it fascinates me and our own evolution and how it shifts like a river.
Yeah, most therapists like me that work with non-monogamous folks really encourage exactly that kind of communication, self-awareness, ability to slow things down and reposition, and then also accepting that we can shift. And some of those shifts can be really dramatic. Janet Hardy, one of the authors of Ethical Slut, is a good friend of mine, and we all love that book. I mean, just again, one of the inspirational works. And now Janet, has largely pulled back from sexuality and is talking about, identifying as more of an asexual at this point in her life. And I mean, these are big shifts. And when we commit to relationships, we're committing to being part of the shift and the evolution.
Yeah.
The neat thing about all of these different flavors of non-monogamy is that we can evolve and we can shift and create what works for us. That's the thing that, I refer to non-monogamous relationships oftentimes as designer relationships, because just like a designer kitchen, we get to design the relationship to fit us and our needs rather than what we're given, what
Right.
we're told is okay.
This is what a marriage should be.
That's right.
Yeah.
But of course, that takes self-awareness. It takes knowing. And unfortunately, most of us enter into relationships not knowing that, we crave sexual novelty, or not knowing that we're prone to sexual boredom, not knowing that sexual sensation seeking is something really important to us, not knowing, the need that we have for trust and love in order to be sexual with somebody. And oftentimes we find that out through this journey and exploration with our partner, which I think ultimately is really amazing and beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. Monogamous or not, why shouldn't we all be having these designer relationship conversations,
Yeah.
right? Whether you're monogamous or not. And so I know that in your book you include interviews and stories with couples living this life. Was there any, particularly memorable or enlightening story that stood out to you during your research?
Yeah, there was one. That was one of the things that a lot of people have commented about. Really stood out with the book was that each chapter has in between it this interlude, this an interview
Yeah.
with couples or people about this, and I did that on purpose because I found that these people's stories and narratives were what changed things for me. The research was one thing, but these stories, these people. And there was this one couple that the wife had grown up in foster care, and she had ended up in foster care as her family basically abandoned her, rejected her, and she became a sex worker for a while. She met a guy. He had had a couple of failed relationships and marriages before that had ended because of infidelity. And this was in the early 90s as polyamory was starting to be talked about. And he said, they're on their first date, and he says to her, what do you think about this monogamy thing? Because I don't think I'm very good at it. Well, she said, what? She'd never heard anybody even consider the idea of a relationship that was non-monogamous. Now, she kept people at a distance because people that you let too close are the ones that hurt you. So because he was willing to embrace a relationship that did not cage her, and she even used the kind of Maya Angelou sort of description of being in a cage, right? Because he didn't want to put her in a cage, she was willing to engage in a relationship with him. Now, she did have attachment wounds, but by not requiring her to be monogamous, it allowed her to now develop a secure attachment that if he had required her to be monogamous and commit and belong to her, it would have been too threatening. And as a therapist, that hearing that story was like this aha moment for me, because a lot of therapists that I talk to are like, oh, polyamory is going to destroy your relationship. Non-monogamy is going to destroy your relationship. Well, here was an example where non-monogamy allowed a secure relationship to develop that wouldn't have otherwise.
Oh my God.
And I thought that was cool as shit. And again, I came into this with this concern that I and that my profession can be overly judgmental. And this was a great wake-up call
That's
for
profound
that.
as fuck.
Yeah, I was
Wow.
gonna say, Madison, can you relate to that at all?
That's profound. In ways, yes, but it just makes me delighted because it's just like it's proof that, non-monogamy can exist. It should
And
exist.
it's a valid form of relationship.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, that it's been around as long as we have. I mean, one of the stories I didn't include in the book, I think, was, Martin Luther, who created Lutheranism, the religion.
Yeah.
He was asked one time whether it was more sinful for a man who could not impregnate his wife to live a life without children, or to allow the wife to have sex with another man so that she could get pregnant and they could have children and raise them together. And Martin Luther said, it is less sinful for her to be sexual with somebody else so that he can have kids.
Whoa.
There you have
And
it.
that was 1500s.
Wow. I mean, I get that. And, even going back to your theory on the sperm count, when we go back to humans through history and tribal culture, basically they would have an orgy. Like all the men would, take their turn impregnating the woman so nobody would know whose child it was, and they would raise the kids together, and that actually made a stronger society. And I know that the culture today is very different, but there's something to that. And
earlier you mentioned something about motivations into this lifestyle. You said we could maybe touch on that. I've been curious to know what some of the motivations are. My motivation was that I just simply am not straight, and so I couldn't. I 4 years into my relationship, I felt like I was living a lie because I was so only half fulfilled in my sexuality, having sex with a man. So that was my motivation. I'm curious what other motivations you found along the way.
So first, Madison, we don't know as much about the motivations of the females and the wives in this. The ones that I've spoken to, when they embraced it, it became a really core rejection of slut shaming. A lot of these women had histories of suppressing their sexuality, and embracing this was embracing the full spectrum and capacity of their sexuality that they had been told to put in a cage, to box up, to hide, to shame. And one woman, said to me really, really eloquently, she said, when my husband tells me I'm hot and he wants to fuck me, he's just doing his job. But when another man says I'm hot and they want to fuck me, now it makes me feel hot. Now it makes me feel desired.
I get that.
I totally get that. I experienced
that.
that so much. And I think it's why I slept with a decent amount of people over the last 6 years. Like that does feel fucking good, especially after being with the same man and feeling like, okay, is he just going down on me because he loves me? I don't want you to, Lindsay and I were talking shit the other day. We were like, what did we say? I don't want you to go down on me because you love me. I want you to go down on me because you want to eat my pussy.
No,
there's a difference. That's what she said.
No, because God love him. I'm a newlywed actually, and I love my husband, and we've been together almost 5 years. We've been married for 3 months, and sometimes he's had a long day or he's tired and he'll offer, "Oh, I'll still go down on you," as like an act of service. And I'm like, that is not hot to me. I want someone down there who wants to eat my pussy, who wants it. Don't do me a favor. And that was a new insight for me, because I was like, why can't I just accept this? I realized for me to be turned on, it's the other person also being turned on.
Right.
Yeah. Which seems
that
basic, but
that synergistic kind of loop and feeding on each other's passion.
Yeah.
Now for the husbands, we know a bit more. And there's a variety of motivations. I mentioned, forced bisexuality for some of these men. First, most of the men that are into this come out of a more conservative background. Jerry Falwell Jr. is not an exception. Most of them are coming out of more conservative, oftentimes Republican. My colleague Justin Lehmiller has a book called "Tell Me What You Want" about sexual fantasies, and he finds that cuckolding is far more common a fantasy in Republican men than in Democratic men.
Really?
And because they come out of a society where, in a culture where, it's all about this kind of superficial 2D image of masculinity. And of course, a real man, his wife would never cheat on him. If she cheats on him, there's something wrong with him. He's weak. Well, the more you make that taboo, the more exciting it becomes for some people. And so I see a lot of guys where, the fantasy is exciting because they can give up having to be the guy with the super hard penis that stays hard the whole time. They can bring in some extra folks and sit back and watch, right? They can relax and they don't have to maintain this artificial kind of macho image. Some of them are into the idea of bisexuality, but they don't let themselves. They're ashamed of it. But by their wife being sexual with other men, they get to be vicariously sexual with those other men by, for instance, going down on the wife after she's had sex with the other man. Right. Oh, I'm not bi. I'm just going down on her. Right. Yeah, I'm eating semen, but I didn't get it straight from the source. So really, I'm still straight.
Oh my God, that's so fascinating.
Some of the guys, again, there's a BDSM flavor to this, that can involve just submissiveness, and submission, experiencing that, the excitement of humiliation in cases. Sometimes these guys, just recognize my wife, can have way more orgasms than me. And I think it would be really, really hot to see her have as many orgasms as she could possibly have. And I guess I got to bring in some extra help to get there, right?
I'll be there with the popcorn.
Right. And then there's voyeurism. A lot of these guys, the wife kind of becomes his personal porn star, and in a good way and a bad way. Sometimes the guys have a certain, they have a script in their head of what they want to have happen. Sometimes the guys can get really controlling and demanding. No, it needs to be this way. It needs to be this way. There's a great video online called Cucking Perfect, and it's this hysterical little comedy skit about a couple doing a cuckold scene, and the husband's being really, no, you can't do it that way. You have to do it this way. And finally, the wife and the other man get frustrated and tie him up so that they get to have the hot sex they want to have, and he can watch.
That's pretty kinky. I kind of like that. The rebellion.
Yeah. So there's a lot of different reasons. In general, we did a research study a few years ago. Justin Lehmiller, Dan Savage of Savage Love, and I did a study around cuckolding, and we found that in general, just like in my book, for healthy people that do this in a healthy way, it's a healthy activity. For unhealthy folks that don't know how to communicate, that don't know how to self-regulate, that haven't established good boundaries in relationship, this can be risky. I mean, you can be playing with fire. And one of the things, some of the things that I see go wrong are, sometimes guys try and trick their wives into cuckolding them, or even get them drunk or high, which is non-consensual, not
Yeah.
healthy, rape, sexual
Not
assault.
consensual. Yeah.
At a more common level, though, I see couples that dive in too soon. They jump in the deep end without figuring things out, without
Mm.
negotiating the boundaries, without identifying the landmines, without figuring out, that hurts a bit more than I thought it would. And so
Yeah.
I encourage couples to really spend time in the shallow end. Fantasize, role play. My book Insatiable Wives is out on out as an audiobook, and read by Rose Caraway, the sexy librarian. She's got an amazing sexy voice.
Nice.
Nobody wanted to listen to me yawling and drawling. And so now couples send me pictures of them going on road trips together, listening to my book, and using it as an opportunity to connect and communicate about whether this is something they want to do.
I love that.
Wow.
I love it because that was going to be my next question, right? For couples who are, for someone listening right now, or someone who's searching the iTunes podcast for a cuckolding episode and they're curious or contemplating exploring this, I think there's some great insights. Do you offer any other, ways to ensure a healthy and consensual exploration of this? Do you have any advice for people that are considering it?
Just like a lot of, kind of edgy alternative sex play, we need to establish boundaries, safe words. We need to respect each other, not yuck each other's yum, but not go beyond our limits and our boundaries. So it takes a lot of self-awareness and listening and mutual respect.
Mm.
The cuckolding, as it's gone so mainstream now, there's a much larger kind of community online, on Twitter, in online groups. When I wrote the book, there was just like one or two online groups that were talking about cuckolding, and kind of how to do it, and how to deal with problems, and everything else. There's a lot more of them now. The
Mm.
thing I would encourage, and I think every cuckoldress wife out there is going to cheer when I say this. Don't think you can learn what cuckolding is by watching cuckold porn,
Oh,
because cuckold porn has no relationship
got
to the reality of this lifestyle.
got it.
Hmm.
We need to create like an educational online program about it from based on your books. That we had Nina Hartley on the podcast, and
Oh, I love Nina. Yeah,
she said the same thing. She's like, "Do not learn how to have." She said, "Learning to have sex from watching porn is like learning how to drive watching the Fast and Furious." We I was like,
absolutely.
"Yeah, that
I don't
was."
know if she started saying that or Reed Mahalko started saying that, but
Oh man,
a lot of us have picked that up. And I don't know if you know Nicoletta Heidegger. She's a sex
Yeah.
therapist in
Yeah, we're friends
LA.
with her.
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, and she was, I heard her saying that exact same thing just a little while ago, and it's great because we all recognize it, but it's, to everybody out there, it's the first time they heard it, they're like, "That's brilliant."
Right, it stuck
Right,
with
right.
me. Yeah, she said
It's
that
one
I
of
think
those.
200 episodes ago, and it always stuck with me.
As
Yeah.
as like a fellow non-monogamer, I've experienced judgment for my lifestyle, and I live in Los Angeles, so it's been like very minimal. And I really hear from some of our listeners around the country that they really have to be closed off. In fact, someone in our listening community shared that they were kicked out of social groups,
Mhm.
and actually fired at work. So I'm curious how you see the societal perception and acceptance of the hot wife and cuckold lifestyle evolving in the future, and what role does understanding and education play in this shift?
Yeah, it's a great question, Madison. There's a big shift that is happening. The end of January, the last week in January, for the past 3 or 4 years, has been Cuck Week, with cuckold couples celebrating cuckolding in their lives and the positives that they experience out of it, specifically to push back against the shame.
Mm.
And that's new. I mean, again, just 15 years ago when I wrote the book in 2009, there was still tremendous shame. The shame is still there. It's a little more localized, and so we see some cuckold couples being able to live openly in more accepting, progressive communities. But there's also been this shift. So historically, women who got caught cuckolding their husbands suffered tremendous consequences. They were raped, they were killed, they were banished, they had their noses cut off. I mean, horrific punishments, stoned to death. Husbands were embarrassed and humiliated and sometimes banished, but didn't really suffer significant consequences. Unfortunately, that still goes on today. I can name, probably half a dozen or more cuckold couples that were exposed publicly, and the wives suffered tremendously. A few years ago in Canada, there was a judge. She and her husband were into cuckolding with black men. They were online with black men, and they had a relationship with a guy, and then it came out as she got appointed to a pretty high, I think, not Supreme Court of Canada, but appeals court, something like that.
Yeah.
And as it was publicized, she ended up eventually having to lose her job and step down. In LA, we've seen multiple teachers that have OnlyFans or secret kind of amateur porn lives where they're doing cuckolding, and that gets exposed, and they get driven out. The schools can't exactly fire them for it,
Yeah, but they
but
can make you want to leave.
they can make you miserable. And unfortunately, I'm seeing that predominantly falling on the wives still.
Man.
So one of the things I do encourage folks to do, and sadly, I mean, our country is in a state of sexual war right now, to be honest. And I consult with folks that are in the porn industry, producing content of various kinds, that are living various sexual lifestyles, etc. And I'm telling everybody right now, you need to look around your neighborhood, because if somebody comes after you for some way, shape, or form for your sexual life, those neighbors are your jury of peers.
Right.
And unfortunately, I have a number of friends and colleagues, were producing content in conservative areas of the country, and then, got exposed and suffered.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I've shared a lot about my life on here, and have it, I teach private music lessons as well, and it's always my biggest fear that someone is, and I'm not like, I'm just, it's still a fear of mine, and I
Yeah.
talk about disrupting shame and everything, but it's still a very real fear for people to have.
That's right.
The fear of punishment, just for, if I would say, if it's consensual, everyone's on board, no one's getting hurt, why should that impact your life? There's this stigma, I think, that anything that is not heterosexual monogamy means you're a pervert.
Yeah. So in my field, in sex therapy, one of the things that we talk about now is the acknowledgement that historically we used to judge whether sex was okay or healthy by what it was. Sex within marriage was healthy, outside marriage was not. Anal sex was unhealthy, penis and vagina sex was healthy.
Right.
But it was by what it was. Homosex was unhealthy, heterosex was healthy. Now we recognize it's not about what you do, it's how you do it. So now we're talking about the principles of sexual health, and the World Health Organization has even really adopted this model, identifying that sexual health is based on consent, honesty, safety, mutuality, no exploitation, shared values. And if those things are there based on a foundation of respect, then we can play in the fringes of these sexual taboos in a healthy, safe way.
Oh, mic drop moment.
So when I work with people around these issues, I don't try and change their sexual behavior or their desires. Instead, I try and change how you do it.
Mm.
Can you do this in a healthy way? If you can, good job.
Right.
Mhm.
Ugh,
Ugh,
amazing. Wow.
I love
That's
this.
what a beautiful way to bow tie this conversation. Thank you so much, Dr. David Ley, for coming on, for really having the courage to be curious and break free from the norm in which your
Mhm.
profession was, and for carving out a new path for others in your career to follow, and for all the people that you have helped, and just for having an open mind. You're a trailblazer, and
Oh,
I know that you've made such a difference for so many people, and the way that you can what you just said, I've never heard it said better, and it's really true. And it's conversations like this are needed, and for people to not be shamed for, like you said, having consensual communicative pleasure in their lives. And yeah, this is just really, I know that this conversation made a difference for me, and I know that it will make a difference for our listeners as well.
Mhm.
And we
thanks.
just
I'll just say, I mean, we're absolutely all in this together. I mean,
Mm.
the people that you all impact, with your podcast, with 300 fucking episodes. Way to go.
I know, can you believe
Holy
it?
shit.
Yeah.
That's wild.
I
Thank
mean,
you.
yeah, I have argued for a long time that if I get credit for all of the orgasms and good sex that people have had as a result of the work I've done,
Yeah.
I might get into heaven.
I'm stealing that.
Oh, yeah, that's a great.
Amazing. Amazing.
Oh.
All right. Well, you know, Dr. Ley, thank you so much. We are going to obviously link all of your website and access, links to all of your fantastic books. Is there any exciting new projects that you are, a sneak peek of any upcoming ventures or topics that you're passionate about exploring we can look forward to?
Um, I'm doing two things now. Kind of new. I do a lot of expert witness work now, and I'm doing a lot of work in the courts, educating juries and judges and attorneys around sexuality issues, so that they don't, particularly around kink issues, so that they are not, saying something's unhealthy or illegal just because it's kinky. And that's really exciting. I'm getting to, again, change people's lives and hopefully change some of the systems. And then I do trainings with the Sexual Health Alliance. I highly recommend them, where we train sex therapists and coaches all around the world. And
Oh, amazing.
last year, actually, um, I did a 2-day weekend training, one day about the psychology of group sex and the other day about the psychology of cuckolding. And it was one of the most fun trainings I've gotten to do in a while. We'll probably be doing that one again soon.
Oh, amazing. All right. Well, you'll have to let us know. Maybe we can come and
Yeah, that would be
meet
great.
you in person.
If you come during the training, please put your mic on mute.
Okay.
Sorry, dad joke.
Ba-dum-bumsh. I loved
Fair
it.
enough.
Well,
Perverted dad joke, but
it was.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Bye.
This has been amazing. Thank you for taking the time to do this.
My
And
pleasure. Thanks
with
for
that,
working with me.
yeah, with that
Yeah,
glitterati, we're going to see you next Tuesday.
Bye.